And
So Maria first, right? Just to
yes.
make sure.
So we should be good. See you on the other side.
Okay. Good morning, Queens. Good morning, New York. This is Tom Gretsch from the Queens Chamber of Commerce. This is another in our series of Meet the Authors. It's something that we came up with a few months ago that we've executed relatively quickly. I wanted to showcase folks that either live in Queens or are from Queens and wrote a book about really any topic, or people who might be from outside of Queens, doesn't really matter where they're from, that wrote a book about Queens in any way, shape, or form, fiction, mystery, autobiographical, whatever it might be. And the goal of that was to kind of showcase our authors. The Queens Chamber has kind of reinvented itself over the last couple of years, going into areas you would not necessarily think a Chamber of Commerce would do. For example, we started a not-for-profit committee, and we have a large number of not-for-profits that, believe it or not, are businesses that we support throughout the borough of Queens. And just a brief little primer on us. We've been around since 1911. This is our 110th year. We're very proud of that. And I have a background in the Fortune 500 as well as startups. I worked in the printing and publishing business for many, many years, and then jumped into the digital marketplace with a startup called Ex Libris many, many years ago. And I just have a love for ink on paper. I am not a Nook guy. I do not like books electronically. I just like the feel and taste and smell of books. And the only requirement I've asked of all of our authors is to get me a copy of their book so I can look at it, review it, and keep it in my library here at the office. So without further ado, I want to welcome, we have two guests today. We're going to start off first with Maria Terrone. Maria, pleasure to see you. Nice to meet you over the internet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about what makes you tick and about your creation.
Okay. First, thanks so much for the opportunity to do this. I am a native, lifelong New Yorker. I am passionate about my city. And when I was 6 months old, my parents moved us to Jackson Heights, where I have basically lived the rest of my life, except for brief stints in another borough, which will remain nameless. So I think of myself primarily as a poet. I have 3 books of poetry and a chapbook, which is a smaller version. I'd say that many of the poems in those books have been inspired by Queens. But then in 2018, I published a book of essays. Basically, I feel that they're lyrical essays. So I try to bring a poet's sensibility to it. The book is At Home in the New World from Bordighera Press. And the title essay, which I named the book after, basically is set in Jackson Heights. And the origin of that essay, it goes back to 2012, when the Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan started a citywide project. It was different in every borough, but in Queens, they contacted 10 writers who either were based in Queens or had, somehow connected with the borough. So I was one of the 10 writers, and they commissioned us to write a nonfiction piece based on, the borough or our neighborhood. So what they did was, the idea was bringing like the museum to the streets. They hired actors who would read these essays in interesting locations around the borough. So it was really fun. And I had an opportunity to read At Home in the New World as well. Different settings like the churchyard at St. Mark's and the top of the Jewish Center in Jackson Heights, and even in some people's apartments. So that's the origin of the book of essays.
Nice. So is this endeavor of yours, this passion of yours, is this your full-time gig? Does it pay the rent? Does it pay the bills? Or do you have a day job?
Well, until a few years ago, I was in charge of the whole communications function at Queens College.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was really, really fun. As you can imagine, very demanding. And before that, I was the PR director at Hunter College. And before that, I worked in all kinds of writing, journalism, corporate communications, a newspaper, community newspaper. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that pay the rent. But the creative work has always been really, really important to me. It is very much part of what makes me tick. And the book of essays, a lot of it is, it's like the sensibility of a baby boomer growing up in New York City and Queens. And, just the perspective of how things have changed in Queens and New York City over the years. Jackson Heights at one point when I was growing up was very Wonder Bread. It was
Yes.
very calm, very predictable. And now it is, according to Daniel Kaufman, who's a linguist at Queens College, he studied Jackson Heights, and he said it's the most ethnically and linguistically diverse place in the US, he said, if not the world. And I think, how can you not be stimulated by living in such an environment? It's gone from Wonder Bread to being this kaleidoscope that's, constantly churning and shifting, and it's so vibrant.
As well as the rest of our borough, in addition to Jackson Heights. I did not know that that's right to our east. We're headquartered in East Elmhurst, but remarkable stat. It's funny and ironic. I was never, and I say this publicly, when he was the mayor, I wasn't a huge fan of David Dinkins. He definitely broke some barriers, becoming the first African American mayor of New York City, but I really wasn't a great fan of some of his policies. It was only after the course of time that I got to appreciate him, had a chance to meet him very, very briefly. And when he passed recently, I wrote a tribute to him, to our members, that it's kind of a statement that I try to live by here in Queens. It's the gorgeous mosaic of New York. All the bits and pieces, all the different colors of the glass in a mosaic that go to make something beautiful. And I truly believe in that. As somebody who is a third generation American from Astoria, and when I grew up, Astoria was mostly Greek, and now it's still Greek, but there's a whole host of other people there. But you're right, Jackson Heights was Wonder Bread, and now you walk down the street, and it's like it's a remarkable transformation of an area that you never really would have thought. But end of the day, it all works. And the last thing I'll say before we talk more about your book and some of your past work and maybe your future work, Maria, is I get asked all the time about, as the fourth largest city in America, why do we enjoy relative peace and tranquility, for the most part, in Queens County when other areas are boiling or simmering or fighting or whatever else? And I look at it as the fact that we have so many diverse people, which could be a challenge in some respects. They're all trying to live the American dream. They're all working really, really hard. And frankly, there's no time to fight. Moms and dads, dads and moms, dads and dads, you pick the proclivity. They're out there working to try to make a living. And, I love seeing people from a different culture or ethnicity sharing their cultural expertise with other people. And so I'm really curious, Maria, about what's next for you when it comes to future work that you want to put out there.
Well, let me just, if I could comment on what you just said. I think, I feel a great solidarity with the immigrants. And we all came from somewhere else. In my case, my grandparents on both sides of the family came from Italy. And I know it was not easy for them coming around the turn of the century. My maternal grandfather, I understand, was a sand hog. Those are the people who helped to, build the subway underground.
Yep.
If I could just read a single paragraph, because it touches
Please.
exactly on what you just said about
Please.
all these ethnicities, and they don't have time to fight. Okay, so from the title essay, here's a paragraph. Am I naive in thinking that food is the link that can bring us together? Once a member of a group called Chefs for Peace was quoted saying, "In most kitchens all over Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, there are Palestinians and Israelis cooking together, shoulder to shoulder, with long knives. Those knives cross daily against ancient stone, keep to themselves. I think that in my neighborhood right now, Pakistanis are chopping onion for chicken biryani in Indian restaurants and vice versa, working side by side despite decades of enmity and religious conflict."
Beautiful.
So you asked about any future endeavors. As I said, I'm primarily a poet, so I am writing more poetry. In the past, some of the poems I wrote were inspired by the Noguchi Museum, the Whitestone Bridge. One of my first poems in my first book is called In Standard Time, and it was inspired by an almost mystical experience that my husband, then my fiance, that we had in Casina Park. And to my shock and delight, I actually won the Alan Tate Award from a journal, $500, big bucks for a poet. There's a Korean fruit and vegetable market around the corner. I wrote a poem called The Fruited Plain, which I understand the former borough president of Queens had read to an assembly. So I am continuing to write poetry and put together another manuscript. As I walk around Jackson Heights, I'm thinking I do want to continue to write essays as well, because it gives me an opportunity to be poetic, but in a more expansive way. This might sound kind of odd, and I'm not sure whether it will go anywhere, but there are a lot of streets in my neighborhood that are named for people. And so, sometimes I know what the stories are behind the names. In other cases, I don't. So I think that there's a law, maybe in New York City, that any streets named have to be after people who are deceased. Would you know if that's true?
I do not know that, but I was actually at the naming of a street for my predecessor, who was a really good man named Jack Friedman. And after he passed in 2015, I think City Council member Barry Grodenchik was the one that was able to get City Council to do it. And it's Jack Friedman Way, not far from his temple and the ambulance corps that he donated.
Yeah, so I do believe that these street names are to honor, deceased people. And I know some of them have very, very interesting stories behind them. So I was thinking, because I do like to do research, having been a journalist, that I might want to try to write an essay about that.
When I drive around Queens, I'm always mesmerized by, I'm not going to call it crazy, but I would call it confusing nature of some of our streets. If I drive down from the north towards the Long Island Expressway on Francis Lewis Boulevard, affectionately known to Baysiders as Franny Lou, and if you pass down that way and cross Northern Boulevard on the right-hand side, there's 39th Street, 39th Avenue, and 39th Place. The mailman must go nuts, but it's a remarkable, it probably just happens only in New York, but that probably would be a great project, Maria, for you, if you've got a proclivity for that. And I'd be happy to make an introduction to the unofficial, maybe he's the official historian of Queens, a fellow named Jack Eichenbaum. Do you know him?
Oh, I know the name. I've never met him.
Jack's terrific.
He could be very helpful.
Jack would be great. In closing, if I may, and I'm sorry we only have a limited amount of time to do this, could you just, as somebody that's been around the block a time or two, especially with roots not only in Queens, but in academia, even though you might have not been a teacher or a professor, you work in that environment, right? So
yes.
Young minds that run around Queens College and other places, what advice would you give for an aspiring man or woman, somebody who wants to be a writer, wants to be an author, wants to be a poet? What would Maria Terrone say to them if they came and asked you that question for advice?
I would say read, 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 and try to write regularly. Bring a little notebook around with you. Try to be observant to what's around you. Anything that strikes you could become the seed of some creative work. And don't, seek out advice and mentors, writers that you admire. Take workshops, and have the courage to send your work out, and know you'll get rejections, but believe in yourself and keep writing.
I think it's great advice for anybody that is out there, either as an aspiring writer, poet, creative, or even a business person. So well said, Maria Terrone. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so
Let's
much.
stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it, Tom.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, next up is another poet. We kind of partnered the poets together, and that's our new friend, Kimberly Reyes. Kimberly, welcome to the program. Glad to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you, and just in general.
Okay, sure. Well, you can see from my background, I am representing Forest Hills and our own, the Ramones. And I'm from Forest Hills. My parents moved here. They're both, well, they were born in Manhattan, but they moved to Queens when they were young. And I sort of am just obsessed with music. And my book, pretty much, my poetry book, is actually, the chapters are divided with quotes by music. I always say it was kind of like my first poetry, so I think that's why it's always been so important to me. And I started my career as a music journalist, actually, because of my love of music. I always thought I was going to be a veterinarian, so I never took like creative writing classes. I didn't know anything about like poetry. And I went to Bronx Science. Like I was just on that path of like science for a long time. And I think that music sort of filled in that gap for me, because I didn't know I was a creative writer at the time, but I was always obsessed with song lyrics. Eventually I realized I was not going to do med school. So I was a music journalist for a while. And then I traveled quite a bit. I've lived in lots of different places, and sort of finally came back to New York, went to Columbia for grad school. And doing so, I discovered my love for poetry, and I was in my 30s when that happened. And just haven't stopped writing poetry since. Like, I just feel like that's when the light sort of like went on in my creative life, and everything changed.
I can remember when we were part of this startup called Ex Libris, which kind of married online book publishing with the internet way back when you were probably in high school back in 2000. But at the end of the day, it was a remarkable thing for a business guy. And I do not have a creative bone in my body. At least I don't think so. Maybe someday. But to field phone calls from writers, right? That, they would submit the manuscript, and it really wasn't vanity publishing, but it was a real, methodology to get your stuff, get an ISBN number and get it published and so on. But to man those phone calls, to staff those phone calls with the tons of people that I hired to do that, it's like a birthing process. I mean, some people think about it as, yeah, it's a manuscript, I put it in, done. It's not a PowerPoint. It's not a Word doc, right? It's like, it's my creation. It's my life. It's my vision. Can you tell us a little bit about how that might have impacted you, especially with, man, you're obviously, like Maria, a very smart person going to Bronx Science and having this vision to be probably one of the hardest trained positions as a veterinarian. But tell us about that whole cycle for you, and how much it meant to you as you write your tomes.
So what you just said is so true. I mean, I refer to my book as my baby. Most authors do. Yeah. And we have anniversaries, like it's like, oh, my baby's 1 year old or 2 years old. And I mean, it gestates for way longer than an actual child, like I don't know anyone who wrote a book in 9 months. So absolutely getting that ISBN, getting it out into the world. And listen, you don't make any money as a poet. You don't go into it for that. It's for the love of poetry. And, just to have, just like you said to begin with, I just loved touching books my entire life, holding them, and to hold something that's your creation, your words on the page. It's everything. And it just feels like, okay, I have left something valuable in this world. Even if my royalty check is just lunch, you know what I mean? Like, I at least have left something really valuable in the world.
And I can remember that vividly when you said the royalty check, because we paid royalties at Ex Libris, and people would be like all anxious about, it might be 2 or 3 or $20, but they were like, I haven't gotten my check yet, right? It was like I did something creative, and the world acknowledged it, and I was able to get something back for it, right? Kind of a special thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Maria. Is this your day job? This probably doesn't pay the bills, right? What makes you tick beyond your poetry?
So I was always pretty much full-time. I worked full-time while I was writing. And I got into copywriting after being a music journalist, which was the smartest thing I've ever done, because then it was like, oh my God, I can live in New York City. Like I can afford things. And I had lived in San Francisco for like 5 years as well. And I was working in Silicon Valley there. But always writing on the side. And actually, I went to an MFA program when I was out there as well. And I was a full-time student. I was working full-time and yet still writing. And I recently, so I substituted, I paid my bills basically as a copywriter. And as a full-time creative writer, so to speak, I basically live off of fellowships. I just came back from Ireland a couple of months ago. I was there on a Fulbright. And so it's sort of like just finding those opportunities to sort of live without, not having to work full time, so that I can really put more time into my writing.
You're a Fulbright scholar. Wow, that's quite an accomplishment. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
If I may ask, I'll jade my question when I say if I add New York to the mix, right? But what's the coolest place and the most interesting place you've ever lived?
I would probably say San Francisco. I mean, like I've lived other places in the world, but like San Francisco to me is just, because it's small, San Francisco, the city of San Francisco is like the size of, I don't even know, like I think Queens might be bigger.
Yeah.
And it's such a small city that like it just feels like your backyard and everything is at your disposal. And also it's just so, I mean, you could be at the beach, you could be at the mountains, you could be in the desert. Everything feels like it's just an hour away. And the literary community there it's a tight community because it's a small city. It's just the most beautiful place on the planet, I think. The food is spectacular. I mean, like, it's not New York, but like it's close. It's second, I would probably say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think San Francisco is everything that, you would want in a city if you could afford to live there.
Yeah, it's funny. I took my wife and 2 kids there a couple of years ago. They probably, I don't know, now they're 18 and 14. Probably was 3 years ago. My wife and I were enamored of the wharf and some of the architecture and the walking around in some of the restaurants, as well as other places we went. But of course, my son was like, he just loved Alcatraz, right? I put him in one of those cells, and I closed the door, and he got all but it is a remarkable place. It really truly is, with the culture and the history and the fire a million years ago, right? It's an incredible place. But I still think there's nothing better than New York. It's going to be a tough road to hoe to get back to what we think was, quote, normal here. Yeah. I'm convinced and I'm committed to help get us there. But when it comes to other people, other things that you talk about, do you do readings? Do you do poetry readings? Do you do those? Well, now I'm probably sure it's all online, right? Tell us a little bit about that and how you accomplish that today.
Yeah, everything's online now, and I miss in-person reading so much. Having said that, the benefit of Zoom and all of these like online things is that it's international now, right? And so like, especially as someone who has spent so much time abroad, like it's so cool to be able to do readings with my friends in, Ireland or Paris or wherever, and to meet new people. I feel like the literary community is just so much greater now because it's an actual international community, and doing workshops, that you can do them. I'm doing like a workshop that normally I'd have to be in Oregon to do in a couple of weeks, and then one that I'd have to be in Palm Beach to do. And like, I'm literally doing them back to back without having to travel. And that's just great. I mean, it's the only good thing I can think of really that's come out of all of this.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit more. I'm fascinated by the juxtaposition of your background with Bronx science and the veterinary thing. I can't get that out of my thick skull, but the juxtaposition of the music piece with the Ramones and like seeing the guys in the background, I kind of get it. And the transition from like music to the writing piece or the poetry. Besides the Ramones, who else had an influence on you when it comes to your writing?
You know, so it's funny, two bands, because the Ramones like are a smidge before my time, but the two of my favorite bands, they were hugely influenced by the Ramones. They actually have songs dedicated to Joey Ramone, and that's like Concrete Blonde, U2. I was super into, I guess, like 80s new wave, and you know, I was born in '77, so it was like I was kind of like, you know, a lot of my friends had older siblings, and so I would like, you know, go to their house and listen to their music collections. So yeah, my love for music, my love for lyrics brought me to music journalism. And as a music journalist, I had such a difficult time reviewing bands because I thought, unless like you're solely in it to be famous, I don't know, it doesn't feel right for me to be able to take you down, you know, with 100-word review. Like I was just like, this just doesn't feel, I feel like I'm on the wrong side of things. And I didn't fully understand why I felt that way at the time, because I never thought of myself as a creative writer. But really that's what it was. I think my difficulty in being a reviewer, especially a reviewer for magazines that, you know, like where they kind of want you to pan things because it's funnier.
Right.
It didn't feel right to me. It just felt like, well, this person, you know, even if they're not so great, you know, they're trying, you know, they're putting themselves out in the world, and I'm just sitting at a desk making fun of them, and
Yeah.
that's not so cool.
Kind of reminds me of, you know, again, like I said before to Maria, I don't have any creative bones or juices in my body, but I know when I see something, I like it, right? Like I love the Flatiron Building in Manhattan, right? I love the Woolworth Building in Manhattan, and I'm not an architect, but I think about things like that when it comes to reviews of artwork, right? You know, you go to some of these places, you know, you go to the Guggenheim and you see a white canvas with I'm making it up, right? But a red streak across it, and some people dismiss that as, how could somebody pay $1 million for that, right? But you know, truly, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? You write a tome, you write some story, you incorporate the Ramones or whatever else, and Maria incorporate other different facets. If it makes her happy, who is anybody else to like diss it, right?
Exactly.
So again, we're almost out of time, but I do want to get your perspective as a woman, and that's a Queens person. Could you give us some advice as well for an aspiring writer that's thinking, do I go the traditional route? Do I go get a job? Do I go become a teacher, a nurse, whatever? Or do I try to settle into a life of, or work towards being creative, whether it's writing or sculpting or whatever else? Because you seem to have a very, very wide repertoire of things that you've done with the music and the writing. What advice would you give for an aspiring, let's just call them a creative?
Sure. Well, if you're already in the academic world, you're kind of where you're probably going to end up, you know, because most poets are teachers. That's how they sort of supplement their income, or how they have any income. But you know, like my story, if you're a writer, you're a writer. Do the writing. You can work full time. You know, you could be in a different world entirely while still doing the writing. Just make sure that, you know, you do things like subscribe to poets and writers. Do things like, definitely my biggest advice is to join workshops, you know, and since everything is online now, it's never been easier. So, you know, and I have an MFA, and I can tell you there are so many writers workshops that I've attended that have actually been more valuable, you know. So it's not, you don't have to quit your job and get an MFA to be a writer. You can just, in your free time, supplement with the important things. And there's so many online classes too. You know, UPenn has like this great Moog, it's called, you know, where you can like, basically like, it's like Poetry 101. It takes you through all of the history of poetry. It's free, it's online. So if you want to write, there's plenty of opportunity to do it in your free time.
That's awesome. Kimberly, thanks so much. I'm going to ask Meg to pop back on the screen, and Maria as well, if you're both still there. I think you are. Just to say, again, thank you. Maria and Kimberly, thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate it. It means a lot to us. We want to help you sell that poetry. Is it fair to say that your tomes are available online as well as in bookstores in the area?
Yes, Amazon, and also a small press distribution, and the usual places. I think BarnesandNoble.com as well.
That's great. And Kimberly, you as well?
Yes, my book is from Omnidon, and it's available online everywhere and from Omnidon's site itself.
I love it. So for our viewers today, thanks for being here. If you wish to be featured on this program, we're doing it right now twice a month for 30 minutes. 15-minute segments. I think we're booked through like September of 2021, which is great. It's a great challenge to have so many folks that want to do this. Again, we're not asking for any kind of remuneration. It's just our way of kind of giving back to the creative community. And we only ask the author to send us a book to review, and that we're going to keep in our library for guests that come in and visit. So on behalf of all the Chamber of Commerce, Maria and Kimberly, thank you so much. Have a great 21.
Thank you.
And let us know when you write the next one so we can make sure to review it and have it and put it in our library.
Sure.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
Until
It was
then,
fun.
take care,
Bye.
folks. Best of luck, and have a great 2021. Happy New Year, everybody.
You
Same
too.
to you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.